Magandang umaga, Luzon, Visayas at Mindanao, Pilipinas. Good morning. Welcome to the Talk ng Pagbabago 2020, the Pre-SONA Forum. Bilang paghahanda sa State of the Nation Address o SONA ni Pangulong Rodrigo Roa Duterte sa July 27. Ang Presidential Communications Operations Office at ang Cabinet Clusters ay narito upang mag-ulat sa sambayan ng Pilipino ukol sa tunay na kalagayan ng bansa at ang mga hakbang na ipinapatupad ng gobyerno na magbibigay solusyon sa mga hamon na dulot ng COVID-19 pandemic. Ngayong araw, panuorin natin ang mga kwento ng pagkalinga sa tulong ng mga programa, proyekto at polisiya na magpapatunay sa pangakong pagbabago ng administrasyong ito. Sa ating huling Pre-SONA Forum, ating kikilalanin ang mga clusters na nangangalaga sa kalikasan at kaligtasan ng bawat Pilipino. Ano nga ba ang mga programa at mga plano para sa seguridad ng ating mga kababayan? Matapos ang matagumpay na pag-rehabilitate sa Boracay, ano pa ba ang mga polisiyang ilulunsad para mas mapangalagaan ang ating kalikasan? Ating alamin dito sa tatak ng Pagbabago 2020, the Pre-SONA Forum.
Sa pagbubukas ng taong 2020, kinaharap ng Pilipinas ang mga napakabigat na suliranin. Pinakamatindi na rito ang pandemya ng COVID-19 na nagbigay banta sa kalusugan at kaligtasan ng sambayanang Pilipino. Sa harap ng pagsubok, tayo'y nagkapit-bisig at nagbayanihan para sa ikagagaling ng lahat. Sa pangunguna ni Pangulong Rodrigo Roa Duterte, puspusan ang paghahatid ng tulong at serbisyo ng pamahalaan sa mga mamamayan sa gitna ng dinaranas na public health emergency. Ang maagap at masikasig na pagtugon sa mga pangangailangan ng taong bayan ay patunay ng pagkalinga at pagmamalasakit ng Administrasyong Duterte sa bawat Pilipino, sa loob at labas man ng bansa. Bilang paghahanda para sa State of the Nation Address ni Pangulong Duterte, muling inihahandog ng Cabinet Clusters ang tatak ng Pagbabago 2020, the Pre-SONA Forums. Sa pagkakataong ito, haharap sa sambayanan ng 6 na Cabinet Clusters upang ihatid ang mga tamang impormasyon at iulat ang katotohanan tungkol sa kalagayan ng ating bansa. Bitbit ang temang patunay ng pagkalinga. Layunin nitong sugpuin ang paglaganap ng fake news at disinformation. Sa unang bahagi ng Pre-SONA Forums, nariyan ang Economic Development Cluster na nagsusulong sa pambansang hangarin na muling umangat, bumangon at lumago ang ekonomiya sa pagkakalugmok sa sangasangang krisis na idinulot ng COVID-19. Kasama rin ang Infrastructure Cluster na pinapausbong ang infrastruktura sa bawat sulok ng bansa upang mapaunlad at mapabuti ang kalagayan ng mamamayang Pilipino. Sa ikalawang bahagi, nariyan ang Human Development and Poverty Reduction Cluster na nangangalaga sa interes ng mga maralitang Pilipino at umaagapay sa mga pangangailangan ng taong bayan sa usapin ng kalusugan, kabuhayan, edukasyon at iba pang mga serbisyo. Kasama rin ang Participatory Governance Cluster na itinataguyod ng isang transparent, responsive at people-centric na gobyerno para sa mas mabilis at epektibong paghatid ng serbisyo sa mga tao. Sa pangatlo at pinakahuling bahagi naman, nariyan ang Security, Justice and Peace Cluster na prioridad ang pagpapanatili ng kaayusan, seguridad at kapayapaan sa mga komunidad. Kasama rin ang Climate Change Adaptation, Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction Cluster na pinapahusay ang kahandaan at katatagan ng mga komunidad laban sa mga kalamidad at sakuna habang pinapaigting ang pagpapatupad ng mga pulisiyang pagpoprotekta sa kalikasan. Sa 4 na taong pagsisikap ng Administrasyong Duterte na maisulong ang tunay na pagbabago, marami na tayong nakamit na mga tagumpay. Sinusubok man ng krisis ang ating bansa sa panahong ito, itutuloy natin ang maganda na nating nasimula. Patuloy ang paghahatid ng mapaggalingang serbisyo sa mga mamamayang Pilipino. Sama-sama, iaangat natin ang bansa. Sabay-sabay, haharapin natin ang mas magandang umaga.
Executive Secretary Salvador Medialdea, National Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana, Environment and Natural Resources Secretary Roy Simatu, Presidential Communications Secretary Martin Andanar, my fellow Cabinet Secretaries, mga kabalikat ko sa gabinete, members of the Diplomatic Corps, partners in the private sector and civil society organizations, friends from the media, fellow public servants, mga kababayan, maayong buntag. I'm deeply honored to welcome all of you to the Pre-SONA Forum of the Security, Justice, and Peace Cluster and the Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction Cluster. The third and last installment of the 3-part Pre-SONA Forums leading up to the main event on July 27. On Monday, as mandated by the Constitution, President Rodrigo Roa Duterte will deliver his 5th State of the Nation address. As I said at the first Pre-SONA Forum, this is a milestone of sorts, as this is the 85th year we will be holding this time-honored tradition. Over the years, the SONA has evolved together with the nation that observes it. The President's 5th SONA, however, is markedly different from his first addresses, as well as those that preceded his tenure as Chief Executive. He will be addressing the nation from the same podium, but for the safety of all members of Congress and the employees of the House, he will be delivering his SONA in a chamber that will not be filled by the legislators, officials, and dignitaries that usually attend this function. Malamang, marami sa atin ay maninibago, kasama na dito si Pangulo. Pero hindi magbabago o mababawasan ang kahalagahan ng talumpating ito. Ang pag-ulat ng Estado sa ating bayan at pagbalangkas ng mga hakbang na gagawin ng gobyerno para iangat ang buhay ng bawat Pilipino. Such a report is more important now more than ever, as government works to chart a safe course for our country as it navigates through unfamiliar and uncertain times, as it works to recoup the gains we have made in the President's first 3.5 years. Sa unang Pre-SONA ngayong taon, dinerecho tayo ni Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez III. He said, the COVID-19 pandemic is perhaps the toughest economic crisis most of our people will live through. May mga binanggit siya mga datos, tulad ng unemployment at ang pagbaba ng koleksyon ng gobyerno dahil sa pagbagal ng negosyo. Sabi naman ni DSWD Secretary Rolando Bautista sa pangalawang Pre-SONA, umaabot sa mahigit na 70,000 OFWs ang kailangang umuwi dahil sa epekto ng pandemya sa ibang bansa. Yesterday, we were provided with additional data that illustrates the challenges we face in the months ahead. In a survey conducted at the beginning of the month, just over 1/5 of those polled said their family had experienced involuntary hunger at least once in the past 3 months, a figure that represents an estimated 5.2 million Filipino families. DepEd Secretary Leonor Briones reported, on the other hand, that only 27% of those enrolled in private institutions of learning have returned to their schools, as many private school students have been transferred by their parents to public schools with families feeling the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. Overall, according to Secretary Briones, the number of enrollees in both private and public schools has so far reached only 77% of DepEd's enrollment target of 27 million. Matindi, malawak, at masakit ang epekto ng COVID-19. May mga pamilyang di makakain. May mga pamilyang di makakapagpaaral. As in any natural disaster, it is society's most vulnerable sectors that have borne the brunt of this pandemic. Our farmers, our youth, our poor. Your government recognizes this, which is why Secretary Bautista stressed last week, patuloy na nagtutulungan ang lahat ng ahensya sa pagbangon ng ating kapwa Pilipino mula sa krisis na atin ngayong hinaharap. Ulitin ko po, ang malasakit para sa bawat Pilipino ay nananatiling pangunahing adhikain ng administrasyon para sa ikagiginhawa ng bawat sektor sa ating lipunan kahit sa panahon ng pandemya. Malinaw po ito sa ibinuhos na pondo para magbigay ng ayuda at para matulungan ang ating mga kababayan. As Secretary Bautista reported, over 106 billion pesos from our Social Amelioration Program or SAP was distributed to provide assistance to more than 19 million beneficiaries during the pandemic. Bukod po dito, naglaan din ng pondo ang gobyerno para sa ating mga manggagawa, mga magsasaka at mga estudyante. For example, the SSS has approved a total of 479,000 applications for calamity assistance amounting to 7.5 billion pesos. To date, it has released 1.7 billion pesos to 102,500 borrowers. It has also launched a program for laid-off workers. And since the start of the lockdown, it has already approved 6,300 applications totaling 84.4 million pesos. To date, SSS has released 76.2 million worth of benefits to 5,740 applicants. The Department of Labor and Employment, for its part, has extended financial aid totaling 6.4 billion pesos to over 1.18 million displaced employees in the formal and informal sectors of the economy, including returning OFWs. Meanwhile, the Department of Agriculture released cash subsidies to over 1 million affected farmers and fisherfolk amounting to 6 billion pesos. Para naman sa mga apektado sa sektor ng edukasyon, may mga hakbang at programa na inilunsad ang pamahalaan upang matugunan ang pangangailangan nila. For those employed by the Government Service Insurance System will introduce a new 30,000 peso computer loan program to help members purchase a computer in light of the shift to distance learning or online classes. In addition to this, in September, the GSIS will launch an educational loan program for its members to help them pay tuition and other school fees for their nominated student beneficiaries. Maglulunsad ang GSIS ng mga bagong programa para matulungan ang mga kawani ng pamahalaan sa pagpapaaral sa kanilang mga supling. Maliban sa computer loan program, meron ding programa para sa matrikula at iba pang mga kaugnay na bayarin. To address the struggles of private schools, private educational institutions can also seek help from the Land Bank of the Philippines Study Now, Pay Later lending program. Since the program's launch 2 months ago, over 80 educational institutions nationwide have expressed interest in accessing this credit facility. As of the beginning of this month, the bank has approved loan applications totaling 260 million pesos. Ito ang ilan sa mga hakbang ng gobyerno para matugunan ang pangangailangan ng ating mga naghihirap na kababayan. Today, we wrap up the pre-SONA activities, beginning with the reports of the Security, Justice, and Peace Cluster and the Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction Cluster. Secretary Delphine Lorenzana of the Department of National Defense shall report on the untiring efforts of the Security, Justice, and Peace Cabinet Cluster in protecting and safeguarding the interests of the people and the nation, particularly the government's efforts to protect our national territories and to safeguard territorial integrity, sovereignty, and sovereign rights, in ensuring the welfare of our overseas Filipinos, in strengthening the rule of law, in institutionalizing an efficient and impartial justice system, in advancing and protecting human rights, and in attaining just and lasting peace. We shall also be provided with information on how the country has increased its defense and security engagements with the international community in areas of logistics and defense support. More importantly, how we shifted from military-centric to civilian-led approach in confronting the armed communist movement and ending armed communist insurgency. The SJPC shall also report its concerted efforts in orchestrating COVID-19 containment and recovery efforts. The Climate Change, Adaptation and Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction Cluster, on the other hand, through its chair, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Secretary Roy Cimatu, will report on how the government has worked to build stronger and safer communities amidst tropical cyclones, strong earthquakes, and other natural disasters that struck the country. Their report will also include how government has responded to disasters through assistance for search, rescue, and retrieval operations, cash for work, loan assistance for agricultural production, processing facilities, and farm improvement for typhoon, earthquake victims, and the recent Taal volcano eruption. It will also highlight improved natural systems, which include the rehabilitation of Boracay and Manila Bay, enhanced climate-resilient communities, reforestation through the enhanced National Greening Program, and better management of hazardous wastes, particularly medical wastes due to COVID-19. Following the presentation of these clusters, an open forum will follow to afford you the opportunity to direct your questions at the concerned department secretaries and heads of agencies. Before I wrap up, allow me to extend my sincerest gratitude and congratulations to our partners who made today's Pre-SONA Forum possible: the Security, Justice, and Peace Cluster, the Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction Cluster, the Presidential Communications Operations Office, the Office of the Executive Secretary, and my fellow workers in the Office of the President. We all also extend our gratitude to all those who tuned in to watch these pre-SONAs to know more about where our country is at, where it is going, and how we are going to get there. Mga kababayan, laging tandaan, kapag sama-sama, kaya nating umahon. Sa tulong ng Diyos at sa magkaisang aksyon, tayo ay babangon. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Secretary Carlo Nograles, ang Cabinet Secretary. Impormasyon na mahalagang malaman ng bawat Pilipino ang dahilan kung bakit patuloy na inilulunsa ng Presidential Communications Operations Office ang tatak ng pagbabago 2020 sa kabila ng isang pandemya. At ngayong ilang araw na lamang bago ang State of the Nation Address ng Pangulo, tayo ay may pakikinggan na dalawa pang cluster. Unahin na natin ang isang cluster na walang sawang nagpapakita ng katapangan sa pagsigurong nananatiling ligtas ang ating bayan. Ngunit ngayong naganap ang Enhanced Community Quarantine, kamakailan lang, kanilang pinamalas ang malasakit sa pamagitan ng pakikiisa sa ating mga frontliners. Kasama po natin ngayong araw si Department of National Defense Secretary at Head ng Security, Justice and Peace Cluster, Secretary Delphine Lorenzana.
Mula sa Security, Justice and Peace Cluster na binubuo ng Department of the Interior and Local Government, Department of Foreign Affairs, Department of National Defense, Department of Justice, Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process, at National Security Council, isang ligtas at mapayapang araw sa ating lahat. Kinagagalak kong iulat ang bunga ng ating pagsisikap para paigtingin ang seguridad, kapayapaan at hustisya sa ating bansa. Sa pangunguna ng Pangulong Rodrigo Roa Duterte, narito ang mga patunay ng patuloy na pagkalinga ng pamahalaan sa ating mga mamamayan. The Philippines continues to pursue an independent and principled foreign policy that serves our national interest, fosters respectful friendships, and facilitates beneficial and meaningful cooperation and partnership with the global community. Defending national sovereignty and protecting territorial integrity is a paramount priority of this administration. President Duterte's bilateral and multilateral engagements with other countries and cooperative mechanisms amongst claimant countries has significantly lowered the tension and has greatly helped in managing the issues in the West Philippine Sea. We have actively pushed for the effective implementation of the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. We are likewise pursuing the early conclusion of an effective and substantive code of conduct in the South China Sea by all the claimant states. We continue to engage them in confidence-building measures. To improve the living conditions of our people in the West Philippine Sea, we are upgrading existing facilities in the 9 islands that comprise the municipality of Kalayaan, particularly the island of Pag-asa. For the first time since 1970s, Pag-asa Island has received major infrastructure upgrades, namely a ship beaching ramp and a sheltered port for our fishermen. It is now easier to proceed with other development projects such as concreting the runway and its apron and construction of other structures for the residents and our troops. Addressing recurrent incursions and harassments by military and civilian Chinese vessels, the Philippines has taken diplomatic actions against China for activities against our national sovereignty. This is on top of our enhanced surveillance, enforcement, security, and development capabilities in the area. The AFP improved its identification, detection, and interdiction efforts through our newly installed air defense surveillance radars, the conduct of wider air and maritime patrols, and setting up additional detachments in strategic locations. Dahil sa mga ito, masosya na nating nababantayan at namamanmanan ang kalawakan at karagatan sa ating teritoryo. We continue to boost our defense capability through the AFP Modernization Program. The AFP has acquired several assets, the most recent of which is the BRP Jose Rizal, the Navy's first brand new frigate that was received earlier this month. Combat support aircraft are also due for delivery this year to the Philippine Air Force. Meanwhile, the President ordered us to defer the termination of the Visiting Forces Agreement with the United States. This allows our armed forces to continue engaging the U.S. forces in joint military exercises. We strengthened our maritime security cooperation with neighboring nations such as Indonesia and Malaysia to secure our shared borders. We also agreed with Indonesia and Palau to advance common interest in managing and preserving marine resources in the exclusive economic zones of the 3 countries. We have also launched marine explorations to protect the biodiversity of our waters. In the Philippine Rise, the government funded an all-Filipino marine science research expedition to coordinate marine science research initiatives and related activities. Moreover, consultations were held by the National Coast Watch Council and the National Task Force on the West Philippine Sea to update our national marine policy. Bilang pagkilala sa mahalagang ambag ng mga overseas Filipinos sa ating bansa, prioridad ng pamahalaan ang pagtataguyod ng kanilang kapakanan. Upang matiyak ang agarang serbisyo saan man sila naroroon, nagdagdag ng 6 na embahada at konsulado ang Department of Foreign Affairs sa iba't ibang panig ng daigdig. Pinalakas natin ang pananaig ng batas sa ating bansa. Napanatili ng ating kapulisan ang kapayapaan at kaligtasan ng ating mga pamayanan. Bumaba ang bilang ng krimen, napabilis ang pagresolba sa mga ito, at napaigting ang kampanya laban sa illegal na droga. The overall national crime incidence has decreased in the first 6 months of 2020 by 51%. Bunga naman ng mga reforma sa Department of Justice, bumilis ang pagresolba ng kaso sa piskalya at ang pagsasampa ng mga ito sa korte. Dahil sa pinalakas ng prosekusyon, nabawasan ang mga kasong nadidismiss at dumami ang nalilitis at nahahatulan. Sa pagdami ng ating abogado, napalawig ang pagbibigay ng libreng payo at serbisyong legal sa ating mga mamamayan. This allows a sense of equity and fairness as those who have less in life are assured of quick and impartial justice, boosting our people's confidence in our judicial system. Bilang pangangalaga at pagsulong sa karapatang pantao, inihabla natin ang mga organisasyong konektado sa terorista at komunistang grupong CPP-NPA. Kinasuhan ng marder sina Jose Maria Sison, Sator Ocampo at kanilang mga kasama para panagutan ng inupakan massacre noong dekada 80 kung saan pinapatay nila ang maraming miyembro ng CPP-NPA dahil sa purging o paglilinis ng kanilang hanay. Kaugnay nito, naglabas na ng warrant of arrest ang korte laban kay Sison at mga kasamahan nito. Para pangalagaan ang karapatan ng mga kabataan, sinampahan natin ng kasong trafficking of persons, kidnapping, child abuse at krimen laban sa international humanitarian law ang mga organisasyong nagre-recruit ng mga child warriors gamit ng kanilang mga salugpungan schools, universidad at kolehiyo. Sa pakikipagtulungan natin sa kagawaran ng edukasyon, naipasara ang mga huwad ng mga paaralang ito na ginagamit na prente ng CPP-NPA-NDF. Layunin ng mga ito na linlangin ang mga katutubong kabataan, lasunin ang kanilang isipan at turuan silang labanan ang pamahalaan. Tinutulungan natin ngayon ang mga apektadong mag-aaral para magkaroon ng dekalidad, kapaki-pakinabang, makabuluhan at makabayang edukasyon. Inihabla din natin ang 14 na kasapi ng CPP-NPA-NDF sa kasong pagpaslang at pagkakaroon ng mga iligal na pampasabog, mga bala at armas. Tungo sa pangarap ng bawat Pilipino na makamit ang maginhawang buhay, nagsisikap ang pamahalaan para ito ay makamtan. Ngunit, hindi ito matatamo kung walang seguridad at kapayapaan sa buong kapuluan. Kaya sa umpisa ng pamumuno ni Pangulong Duterte, gumawa siya ng hakbang para matuloy ang pag-uusap tungkol sa kapayapaan at tigil putukan sa lahat ng mga armadong grupong lumalaban sa gobyerno. Unfortunately, the attempt to dialogue with the CPP-NPA-NDF did not prosper due to their insincerity. The government has no choice but to address the communist insurgency on its own. To end the 51-year-old communist insurgency, the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict was created to harmonize all efforts of the government to implement a peace framework centered on national development and good governance. Hindi baril at bala ang solusyon para wakasan ang mga armadong grupong lumalaban sa pamahalaan, kundi mabigyan sila ng pagkakataong magbagong buhay at mabuhay ng tahimik kapiling ng kanilang mga pamilya. Dahil sa Enhanced Comprehensive Local Integration Program ng Task Force Balik Loob, na binubuo ng iba't ibang ahensya ng nasyonal at lokal na pamahalaan, libo-libong dating rebelde na ang natulungang magkaroon ng bahay, lupa, kasanayan at kabuhayan. Sila ang nagiging inspirasyon ng mga dati nilang kasamahan para sila ay magbalik loob na rin. Upang matugunan ang mga pangangailangan ng mga nagbabalik loob, nagpagawa tayo ng mga halfway homes sa mga lalawigan para magsilbing pansamantala nilang tuluyan habang inaayos ang kanilang permanenteng tirahan at kabuhayan. We are also honoring our signed peace agreements with the other internal armed conflict groups such as with the MILF, MNLF, RPMP, RPA, ABB, TG Kapatiran, and CBA, CPLA. Patuloy nating binubuhusan ng tulong ang mga komunidad sa pamamagitan ng payapa at masaganang pamayanan o pamana program. Marami na ang natapos at marami pang kasalukuyang ginagawang community development projects sa buong bansa. In Marawi City, our social healing and peace-building programs are being implemented to promote social cohesion and develop a culture of peace, mutual understanding, and solidarity. Through various peace forums, former combatants and their families have become peaceful and productive citizens. Binalangkas natin ang National Action Plan on Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism in the Philippines, ang kauna-unahang programang kontra sa radikalismo sa Timog Silangang Asya. Pinagkakaisa nito ang pamahalaan, civil society, relihiyosong grupo at iba't ibang sektor ng lipunan upang masugpo ang radikalismo. The most successful peace initiative of the government is the passage of the Bangsamoro Organic Law that created the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao o BARMM. The Bangsamoro Transition Authority undertakes capacity building, legislates laws, and pursues partnerships with the national government and international community to realize their dream of self-rule. An intergovernmental relations body has been formed to coordinate the efforts of the national and BARMM governments for the development of BARM. Part of the Bangsamoro Organic Law is the decommissioning of MILF combatants. 30% of them have already been decommissioned, and the remaining 70% will be decommissioned in the next 2 years. The passage of Republic Act number 11479, also known as the Anti-terrorism Act of 2020, will greatly enable our security forces to proactively prevent and defeat terrorism. Titiyakin namin na ang bisa ng batas na ito ay itutuon lamang sa mga teroristang gustong maghasik ng lagim at karahasan sa ating mga mamamayan at pamayanan. Hindi namin pahihintulutang magamit ito para hadlangan o yurakan ang mga karapatang pantao sa ating lipunan. Sa kasalukuyan, ang buong daigdig ay nakatuon sa pandemyang COVID-19. Nagsisikap tayo para pigilan ang pagkalat ng sakit at maibsan ang masamang epekto nito sa buhay ng ating mga kababayan at sa ating bansa. The National Task Force on COVID-19 integrates, streamlines, and decentralizes government's efforts through our National Action Plan. Anchored on the test, treat, and trace management system, we focus on prevention, detection, isolation, treatment, reintegration, and eventual adoption to the new normal. As of July 16, 87 na ngayon ang ating testing laboratories at nasa mahigit 50,000 na kada araw ang ating kakayahang mag-testing. Maliban sa 4 na mega swabbing centers, mayroon na rin tayong 15 mega COVID temporary treatment at monitoring facilities at higit 7,000 local isolation at general treatment facilities sa buong bansa. Halos 2 milyong personal protective equipment at libu-libong PCR kits na rin ang ating naipamahagi sa mga ospital at ibang frontliners. Massive efforts were also undertaken by the DFA to bring home overseas Filipinos who were displaced and stranded due to the pandemic. Those who were severely affected were provided with financial and legal assistance. Ang Philippine Air Force at Philippine Navy ay nagamit sa paghakot ng mga medical supplies mula sa ibang bansa. Nagamit din ng Philippine Air Force, Philippine Navy at Philippine Coast Guard sa paghatid ng mga dumadating na mga overseas Filipinos at locally stranded individuals sa kanilang lalawigan. Ang Philippine Army naman ay nagbigay ng libreng sakay sa Metro Manila. Nitong ika-18 ng Hulyo, mahigit 72,000 overseas Filipinos na ang ating ligtas na naihatid sa kanilang mga probinsya. Bilang pagsunod sa atas ng Korte Suprema, pinalaya ng Department of Justice ang libu-libong mga bilanggong matagal nang nakapiit, subalit hindi pa nahahatulan. Pinabilis din ang paggawad ng parole para sa pansamantala o ganap na paglaya ng mga bilanggong dapat tumanggap nito. Habang nilalabanan natin ang pandemya, bumuhos naman ang donasyon at suporta mula sa lokal na pribadong sektor. Patunay na buhay ang diwa ng bayanihan sa ating bayan. Sa ngalan ng ating mahal na Pangulo at ng buong National Task Force on COVID-19, maraming salamat po sa mga nagbigay ng tulong. Upang magtagumpay tayo laban sa COVID-19, ang kailangan natin ngayon higit kailanman ay disiplina, kooperasyon at pakikisa sa pamahalaan at sa isa't isa. Ang sabi nga ng ating mahal na Pangulo, walang iwanan, we recover and heal as one. Pasalamatan din natin ang ating mga sundalo at mga pulis na nasa front lines, yung mga nagbabantay ng mga checkpoints at nagpapatupad ng quarantine rules sa mga barangay. Kasama na rito ang mga military doctors at nurses na nasa mga COVID hospitals. Araw-araw nilang isinusuong ang kanilang mga sarili sa panganib para pagsilbihan ang bayan. Sa ngalan ng buong Security, Justice and Peace Cluster na pinangungunahan ni na Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr., Secretary Eduardo Año, Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr., Secretary Minardo Guevara, Secretary Hermogenes Esperon Jr., at ang inyong lingkod, Secretary Delphine Lorenzana, kami pong lahat ay lubos na nagpapasalamat sa inyong patuloy na suporta. Maraming salamat at mabuhay ang sambayanang Pilipino.
Maraming salamat, Secretary Delphine Lorenzana, at sa lahat ng mga modernong bayaning bumubuo sa inyong cluster. Decisive leadership, ito ang dahilan kung bakit natin nakakamit ang progreso. Sa administrasyon na ito din na ipakita na decisive leadership can also be the key para magkaroon ng pagbabago sa pangalaga sa ating kalikasan. Matapos ang matagumpay na rehabilitasyon ng Boracay at ng Manila Bay, ano-ano pa ba ang mga hakbang ng climate change adaptation and mitigation and risk reduction cluster para masigurado na kasama ang kalikasan sa pag-asenso at pagtamasa ng positibong mga resulta. Alamin natin mula mismo sa head ng cluster, DENR Secretary Roy Simato.
No war, no recession, no previous pandemic has had such a dramatic impact in people's lives the past century as COVID-19 has in a few short months. On the other hand, climate change is perhaps the greatest challenge we have ever faced post-industrial revolution. Average global temperatures have risen by almost 1 degree centigrade because of increased human activities. The scientists have warned about global warming, hitting the point of no return. If this tipping point needs to be delayed or tackled, we must limit carbon emissions to keep global temperature rise to less than 2 degrees centigrade within this century. Sa gitna ng pandemya ng COVID-19, Paano ba natin harapin ang banta ng krisis sa klima? Any long-term response to COVID-19 and zoonotic diseases must tackle environmental protection and climate change. So therefore, climate action needs to be consistently pursued. The Cabinet Cluster on Climate Change, Adaptation, Mitigation, and Disaster Risk Reduction has been moving in a direction where our actions and investments today will potentially prepare us for the current health emergency, future pandemic, and the looming climate crisis.
The Cabinet Cluster on Climate Change Adaptation, Mitigation, and Disaster Risk Reduction worked relentlessly to help President Rodrigo Roa Duterte build stronger and safer communities. July 2019 to May 2020, tropical cyclones struck the Philippine Islands. Strong earthquakes hit different places, and an El Nino was experienced. These caused billion-peso damages to properties, agriculture, and infrastructure. Precious lives were lost, thousands injured. January 12, 2020, the Taal volcano erupted. Billions of pesos worth of damages to agriculture and infrastructure were reported, affecting thousands of families. Maagap at mapagkalinga tayo sa ating mga kababayan bilang tugon sa panahon ng krisis. Over 2 billion pesos worth of assistance were provided for search, rescue, and retrieval operations for typhoon and earthquake victims nationwide, to the affected families of the Taal volcano eruption, to poor individuals living in hazard-prone areas nationwide through cash for work activities. Calamity-affected small-scale farmers and fisher folks, including agrarian reform beneficiaries, were provided with over 6 billion pesos as loan assistance for agricultural production, processing facilities and farm improvement, as insurance for 1.92 million hectares of rice, corn, and high-value crops. Over 300 million peso worth of climate change adaptation projects were approved for implementation under the People's Survival Fund in several provinces. Kaalaman at kahandaan, matibay na susi sa ating katatagan. Fervently acknowledging the need to invest for disaster preparedness, the Philippines has made significant progress in collecting comprehensive and updated risk information using different technological tools. Vital for informed decision-making and coordinated action, one Doppler weather radar was established in Bohol in 2019, bringing an overall count of 17 Doppler weather radars established nationwide. Number of high-frequency Doppler radars has increased to 24. Commissioned were 2 satellite telemetered seismic stations, raising the total to 104. Generated were additional 9 active fault maps. Training and technical assistance were provided to LGUs, national government agencies, and the private sector through the GeoRisk PH, Hazard Hunter PH program, and the GeoAnalytics PH platform were developed, aimed to generate data for more accurate reporting and preparing for hazards. The Philippines was able to access funds from the Green Climate Fund with the approval of $10 million project for the establishment of a multi-hazard, impact-based forecasting and early warning system in hazard-prone provinces. This proves government's determination to scale up forecast-based financing, which uses weather projections to give vulnerable communities the resources they need to prepare. High-level simulation exercise among cabinet officials and executives was conducted, providing an avenue to identify areas to strengthen disaster preparedness, prevention, and mitigation. To ensure public service continuity at post-disaster, government command and control centers are being established to ensure prompt availability of critical lifelines. Safe open spaces and critical lifeline facilities in Metro Manila were identified and mapped. Government Emergency Communication System Mobile Operations Vehicle for Emergency, a rapid deployable emergency communication system to disaster-stricken areas in the country, was launched. tuloy-tuloy na pagkalinga sa likas na yaman at kapaligiran, susi sa ating katatagan. Government improved natural systems and enhanced climate-resilient communities. Boracay Island rehabilitation, a President Duterte legacy, is about enforcing the law. Beach easement recovery reached 67% completion. Structures not compliant of the required easement were demolished. Boracay circumferential road improvement is almost 50% completed. Boracay drainage improvement project's construction to address island flooding is on track. Water quality already reached the safe level for swimming and skin diving. Manila Bay's rehabilitation makes headway in the cleanup and improving the water quality, another milestone of the President. At the Manila Baywalk, a 1.7-kilometer wastewater interceptor was constructed to catch dirty waters from the three notorious outfalls of Manila at a solar-powered sewerage treatment plant, STP, beside the Manila Yacht Club. This STP is capable of treating 500,000 liters of untreated water per day. As a result, coliform levels at the Baywalk area have drastically decreased recently. A 2.5-kilometer-long trash boom was already installed, designed to trap for collection of floating debris coming offshore before these would inundate the seawall of the Manila Baywalk. Dredging the waters fronting the whole Manila Baywalk is in full blast, while nourishment of the beach area beside the U.S. Embassy is ongoing. Dredging of the Tullahan-Tinajeros River system through the support of San Miguel Corporation's 1 billion pledge for the dredging and cleanup of the river system has started. With the help of barangays, communities, private sectors, and Estero Rangers, the massive cleanup of esteros continues. Direct dumping of trash along the riverways draining to Manila Bay is a critical issue that needs to be resolved in a comprehensive manner. Provision for resettlement of the informal settler families is a key action in the rehabilitation of Manila Bay. With the relentless cleanup drive and the mobilization of the barangays and communities, this is how Baseco looks like now. The cleanup prepared the communities for the need for continuing hygiene to fight COVID-19. After 1 year since the battle for the Manila Bay was waged, people can see concrete actions whereby they can look forward, watching the sunset by the bay and enjoy a nearby beach. Enhanced National Greening Program remains the government's major tool for reforestation. 2.031 million hectares were planted with 1.704 billion seedlings, generating 5,004,336 jobs. ENGP provides livelihood opportunities to the communities. Support to bamboo plantations was increased. Mangrove rehabilitation is being pursued to protect coastal communities. 35 legislated marine protected areas are being maintained and protected. 29 marine protected area networks were established to improve fish catch and conserve biodiversity. Rehabilitation of mineralized areas and slope stabilization of mined-out and tailings-covered areas is being implemented. To ensure steady water supply, the Angat Dam low-level outlet was rehabilitated to serve as backup water discharge, ensuring operability. A total of 89 deep wells were reactivated, 156 mobile water tankers, and 12 static water tanks were deployed in 45 affected barangays. 46 groundwater monitoring wells were installed in groundwater critical areas. Oplan Tubig para sa kinabukasan. Makibalita, maghanda, magkaisa. The campaign to conserve water was scaled up. With the threat of COVID-19, all water utilities, water service providers were directed to submit a Waterworks Operation Action Plan. Allocation for Metropolitan Waterworks and Sewerage System was increased to meet the anticipated high water demand in Metro Manila. Government is steadfast in controlling pollution. 27 dump sites were closed. 382 materials recovery facilities and 22 sanitary landfills were constructed. To manage garbage, LGUs were provided with equipment and facilities worth over 1 billion pesos. Guidelines for the integrated management of municipal solid wastes through waste-to-energy facilities took effect. Use of certain single-use plastic items were prohibited in all government offices. Wastes from Korea without importation clearance were shipped back to Korea. To respond to the accumulation and improper disposal of medical wastes due to the COVID-19 outbreak, new policies were issued to better manage hazardous wastes. Government relentlessly pursued the protection and rehabilitation of rivers. 16 rivers nationwide were identified as most improved on water quality. 585 water bodies to date were adopted nationwide by private sector partners. Monitoring of water bodies nationwide showed improvement in water quality. Compliance enforcement in major recreational beaches was intensified. 447 notices of violations for encroachment of easements and direct discharge of wastewater were issued. Constructions of sewage treatment facilities were actively promoted among LGUs. Sabang Sewerage Collection and Treatment System Project in Puerto Galera was fully operational. Sewage treatment plant of the Panglao Bohol International Airport is operational. The LGU will soon construct the 100 million pesos worth JICA grant sewage treatment plant project, an integrated approach to address wastewater management in Panglao Island. On air quality management, 104 ambient air quality monitoring stations are being maintained in highly urbanized centers nationwide. The data show that in 2019, the country has good air quality as levels of criteria pollutants PM10 and PM2.5 were within the standard. Government promotes renewable energy resources and technologies. Alternative fuels and energy technologies are actively commercialized. In 2019, about 3,249.87 thousand tons oil equivalent, KTOE, 60% electricity, 40% fuel were saved through the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Program. Implementing rules and regulations of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act was approved on November 22, 2019. To support response activities to cushion the COVID-19 pandemic economic impact, uninterrupted supply of power was ensured. Crude and petroleum products are sufficient. This was supported by the operations of downstream facilities in the quarantine period. Policies on ensuring the uninterrupted energy services were issued. The Build, Build, Build program also means an infrastructure system that focuses on resiliency and sustainability to meet people's needs and unlocking economic opportunities for the people. As of March 10, 2020, 87 infrastructure projects were completed. Other completed projects are the 100 million peso Arcon Flood Control Project in Isabela, Maon Catchment in Butuan City, construction of revetment structures for the most eroded riverbanks in Tuguegarao City, amounting to 2.113 billion pesos, and the flood management and mitigation projects in Bohol and Cebu. There are now 441 traffic signalized intersections under the expansion of intelligent transport system worth 10 billion pesos, aimed to serve as a roadmap for the envisioned renewal and upgrading of the existing Metro Manila traffic signal system. Building resilience to climate impacts could cost us 140 to 300 billion US dollars annually by 2030. While meeting World Health Organization minimum standards for pandemic preparedness will require up to 3.4 billion US dollars per year. Climate action and disaster preparedness cannot wait. Our choice is not to delay and pay. Moving forward, we shall plan and prosper. This is CCAM DRR Cabinet Cluster Reporting.
Climate emergency remains urgent as ever. It is like the COVID-19 emergency. just in slow motion and much graver. The Cabinet Cluster and CCAM-DRR shall prioritize actions and investments that will reduce the long-term health impacts from and increase our resilience and adaptive capacity to both coronavirus pandemic and climate change. More effective healthcare waste management shall be implemented to overcome the huge volume of infectious and hazardous waste in hospitals. Treatment, storage, and disposal facilities in the country shall be increased. To prevent zoonotic diseases due to biodiversity loss, we shall intensify, enhance surveillance and enforcement activities in degradation hotspots and critical ecosystems. Research and development on utilizing natural resources for disease prevention and cure shall be undertaken. For food security, the plant program shall be aggressively undertaken. Reforestation and watershed management, forest protection, and agroforestry development, especially in critical watersheds, shall be strengthened. Family-based approach shall be adopted under the expanded National Greening Program to provide livelihood opportunities. Increased demand for water during the COVID-19 pandemic shall be addressed by fast-tracking the development of alternative water sources. The capacities of the local government units, especially the barangays, shall be strengthened as first responders and frontline service delivery units. Data infrastructure and early warning systems in the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Operations Center shall be upgraded. We shall endeavor for a low-carbon path to recovery by sustaining the investments on renewable energy and energy conservation programs to ensure continuous power supply amidst pandemic. Maramdaman natin ang kalinga ng gobyerno sa bawat bagyo, baha at lindol na dinanas natin. Nakita natin ang kalinga ng gobyerno para sa pangangalaga ng kalikasan. We were able to demonstrate to the whole world that if we act with the political will as shown by this government in its fight against pandemic, we can actually see the change we want. Malaking dagok sa buong mundo ang naging dulot ng COVID-19. Hinamon ang ating katatagan. We are at the point where humanity is given an enforced chance to stop and think and to choose how we rebuild. And we shall come out of this in such a way that we can collectively deal with climate change and disasters. We shall reimagine our relationship with nature by catalyzing structural investments and behavior change. We shall convert this health crisis into opportunities to accelerate climate action. We shall formulate responses to the pandemic through a climate lens. Let us seize this key moment for climate response and action in the aggressive build-up of adaptive and resilient communities. Patuloy tayong magiging matatag. Lalabanan natin ang dagok at hamon na kinakaharap natin. Hindi lamang sa hamon ng pandemya, ganon din sa hamon ng panahon. Palakasin natin pagkalinga tungo sa katatagan.
Ating narinig ang mga ulat mula sa Security, Justice and Peace and Climate Change Adaptation, Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction Clusters. Ngayon naman po ay magtutungo sa pagsagot sa mga katanungan ng publiko. Makakasama natin live via Zoom ang mga heads of agencies na sina DNR Secretary Roy Cimatu, DND Secretary Delphine Lorenzana, CCC Secretary Emmanuel de Guzman, DOST Secretary Fortunato Boy de la Peña, NSC Secretary Hermogenes Esperon Jr., DFA Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr., DOJ Secretary Menardo Guevara, DILG Secretary Eduardo Año, OPAP Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr., DA Secretary William Dar. Simulan na po natin ang mga katanungan. Unahin po natin ang tanong para kay Secretary Delphine Lorenzana. It was reported that the DND donated a part of its budget for COVID-19 fund. How did this affect the AFP modernization program? Secretary Del.
Good morning, Sec Martin. Palagay ko yung word na donate ay hindi appropriate kasi hindi naman namin pera yan. Ang tama siguro ay reprogramming of the budget from some projects sa DND towards the COVID campaign or COVID fund. Out of the 19.3 billion pesos na ibalik sa DBM, 9.4 billion ang para sa modernization. Yung iba naman 9.7 billion para sa capital outlay at 125 million yung para sa MOOE. Ngayon, itong mga projects na ng modernization na natanggalan ng pera ay naiurong natin sa susunod na mga taon. Kasi hindi naman sila masyadong critical sa ating misyon. So ito ang naibalik sa DBM, 19.3 billion. And out of that, 9.4 billion para sa modernization. Thank you.
At Secretary De Lorenzana, thank you po. Susunod na katanungan ay para porman kay Secretary Esperon. In the implementation of the Anti-terrorism Act of 2020, how will the government ensure that the people are protected against possible abuses in the application of this law and that human and civil rights are upheld? Secretary Jun.
Magandang umaga, Secretary Martin, at sa ating fellow cabinet members. Magandang umaga sa ating mga kababayan. You know, ang Republic Act 11479 or the Anti-terrorism law states as a matter of policy that the state shall uphold basic rights and fundamental liberties of the people as enshrined in the Constitution. And that in pursuit of this policy, quote, governments shall not prejudice respect for human rights, which shall be absolute and protected at all times. Thus, in Section 4 of the law, enumerated are the acts that can be considered as terroristic activities. And in Section 4 itself, it is provided that terrorism shall not include advocacy, protest, dissent, stoppage of work, industrial or mass action, and other similar exercises of civil and political rights. It is therefore very clear that activism is not terrorism, and terrorism is not activism. And so, what are the other safeguards in the anti-terrorism law? One, terrorists are those designated by the Anti-terrorism Council pursuant to the United Nations Security Council Resolution number 1373, or those that are proscribed through the Court of Appeals, or those that are arrested in flagrante delicto. After designation and proscription, pagkatapos ng designation at proscription, suspects are put under surveillance that will be applied for and which will be authorized by the Court of Appeals. and if surveillance is done without order of the Court of Appeals, it is punishable by 10 years imprisonment. Law enforcers also who remove, delete, shred, or destroy results of surveillance face imprisonment of 10 years. Agents who open and dispose of evidence without court authority shall be penalized with 10 years of imprisonment. Moreover, arrests and detentions shall be immediately reported in writing to the judge of the court nearest the place of arrest. And this written notice must be furnished to the Anti-Terrorism Council and the Commission on Human Rights. This is the first time that we are doing it. We report the arrest to the Commission on Human Rights. Otherwise, the penalty will be 10 years imprisonment. Violations of rights of detainees, failure to exercise and maintain official logbooks, torture and coercion during investigations and interrogations shall be punishable with imprisonment. Napakaraming punishment nito pag nagkamali ka dito. That's why we need technical and trained people that will work in counter-terrorism. There are 5 other offenses punishable with imprisonment, including examining bank deposits, placements, and trust accounts without authorization. And we must realize that, very importantly, as another safeguard and limit to the powers and functions of the Anti-Terrorism Council itself, the Council shall not function as a judicial or quasi-judicial body. Its actions will be based on law and by authorization of the courts. Finally, there shall be a joint congressional oversight committee with 12 members from the Senate and from the House of Representatives, with 2 members from the minority. Yan ang joint oversight committee. And the implementing rules and regulations of the Anti-Terrorism Act shall be furnished to this joint oversight committee. We are therefore confident that with this Anti-Terrorism Act, we will be better equipped and more capable in addressing the menace of terrorism. The Anti-Terrorism Act, therefore, will usher in a culture of security through orderly and legal implementation of laws and procedures, and due regard for human rights, liberty, and life. Kaya huwag matakot sa anti-terrorism law. Ito ay para sa atin. Activism is not terrorism. Terrorism is not activism. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat, Secretary June Esperon. Ang susunod na katanungan po naman ay para kay Secretary Teddy Boy Locsin. Filipinos outside our shores are equally affected by the pandemic, if not even in more vulnerable condition. How does the DFA ensure that our overseas Filipinos are not left behind in all of our government's efforts to address the impact of the pandemic? Good afternoon, Secretary Locsin.
Good afternoon, Martin. Nice to see you again. My God, we haven't seen each other for a while. We are committed to the protection of overseas Filipinos by providing various forms of assistance, as well as pursuing advocacies to ensure the protection of migrants and the fight against trafficking in persons. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the DFA has been working day in, day out to assist our overseas Filipinos, following the instructions of President Rodrigo Duterte to bring home any Filipino who wants to come home. The DFA has facilitated the repatriation of about 96,228 overseas Filipinos. That's probably, since yesterday, you'll probably get another 1,000 today. A total of 41,981 seafarers, 54,247 land-based overseas Filipinos. Most, if not all of them, have lost their jobs overseas as economies continue to suffer from COVID-19. The DFA and Philippine embassies and consulates general around the world have arranged repatriation and chartering of flights, the settlement of immigration penalties. We pay the penalties and related charges, including exit visas and securing of landing clearances for flights in the Philippines. The DFA has provided standby funds to our embassies and consulates general for emergency supplies, medical assistance, food, and accommodation for overseas Filipinos severely affected by COVID-19. The DFA will continue these repatriation efforts for as long as there are Filipinos who want to come home. And when this COVID broke out, the president asked me, "Do you need more money?" I said, "No, we work with what we have." And as a result of that, we are canceling all our repairs, all our retrofitting, all our capital outlays in order to use all our money to bring our people home. Because that is what the president wants. And the president is the president of the overseas Filipinos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Locsin. Our next question is for Secretary Ed Año. How will you address the sudden surge in the number of COVID-19 cases in the country given the current capacity of the government in contact tracing? Magandang hapon po sa inyo, Secretary Ed.
Magandang hapon naman, Secretary Martin. Magandang hapon sa ating mga kababayan. First of all, sa pandemic na to, ang pinakaunang dapat talaga na-establish ay apat. Contact tracing teams, ang testing centers, isolation facilities, at designation of COVID hospitals. And for contact tracing, we continue to strengthen all our contact tracing efforts for COVID-19. The DILG issued Memo 2020-077 establishing the local government unit task force against COVID-19 to give the authority for the LGU to lead the task force on contact tracing. Meaning to say we have the provincial, city, municipal task forces against COVID-19. And we have also a memo or memorandum of agreement existing between the DOH, the PNP, the Bureau of Fire, and the AFP for data sharing and localization of contact tracing efforts. As of now, meron tayong 4,818 contact teams, no? Or contact tracing teams na mayroong 65,674 contact tracers nationwide. But of course, we still need about 87,092 contact tracers. And we are ready actually, no, upon the enactment of Bayanihan 2, we will initially recruit 50,000 new contact tracers. And right now, Mayor Benji Magalong is designated as our czar on contact tracing. And together, we continue to do consultations, dialogues, training, and provide advices to affected LGUs, particularly on LGUs that are on localized lockdown or implementing localized lockdown. And we are also developing the contact tracing e-system, wherein we will employ COVID-19 data collection tool, GIS platform, and analytical tool for link analysis. But the bottom line here is the individual person. Alam mo, sa bilis ng pagdami ng ating mga new cases ngayon, we need the people to step forward. If they have close contact or have been exposed, you can actually reach our LESU or SESU, our LGU and health officials. Sa bawat isang positive na natitrace natin, if we go back for 14 days, 37 close contacts ang nag-generate niyan. At ito ay possible na maaaring infected. This is really what you call lots of work. But we will do it and we will continue to strengthen our contact tracing efforts. And with additional contact tracing members, we can defeat this COVID-19. Ilang Sec Martin.
Maraming salamat po, Secretary Ed Año. Ang susunod po na katanungan natin ay para kay Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. As Chief Implementer of the COVID-19 NTF, how will the Phase 2 of the National Action Plan against COVID-19 help sustain the gains achieved in our fight against the disease? Good afternoon po sa inyo, Secretary Galvez.
Magandang afternoon po, Secretary Martin. The second phase of the National Action Plan against COVID-19 will focus on ensuring the health of Filipinos while we provide breathing space for our nation's economy. Alam po natin na talagang nung matagal po na mahigit na 100 days na lockdown, talaga po nagkaroon po tayo ng sa economy. So we need to spring up our economy. So the NAP Phase 2 is based on the hammer and dance theory, wherein the government shall continue to contain the spread of the virus through its zoning and containment strategy or targeted lockdown, while slowly rebuilding our economy. So binibigyan po natin na mataas na antas na responsibilidad ang ating mga local government units, particularly ang ating mga mayors at barangay captain, para po magkaroon po tayong tinatawag na granular targeted lockdowns para po ang ano po natin ay ano po natin ang spread ng virus. Ito po ay ginagawa po natin para magkaroon po ng immediate response para po ang ating mga nagkakaroon na mga lugar na mga new cases ay ating pong makaagad pong maagapan. We will also continue to strictly implement the health and safety standards across all quarantine classification, particularly also sa ating mga private sectors at mga workers, as well as we will further increase our testing capacity. Meron na po tayong protocols, expanded testing, so that we can test as much as 10% of our people. So we already had more or less 10 million testing kits available for that. And we are now increasing our testing capacity, now more than 50,000, and we were able to test 27,000 a day. So ito po ang kung ginagawa po ngayon, pero ang ating pong ating message sa ating mga mamamayan ay ang sinasabi nga po ay iwas po tayo sa ating maapektuhan ng COVID. Protektahan po natin ang ating mga sarili para maprotektahan po natin din ang ating kabuhayan at ang ating ekonomiya. Ilan po at maraming po salamat.
Maraming salamat po, Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. At ang huli na katanungan para sa Security, Justice, and Peace Cluster ay para po kay Secretary Menardo Guevara ng DOJ. What are the innovations or programs of the DOJ to assure the public that the rule of law is always upheld despite the COVID-19 pandemic? Magandang hapon po, Secretary Guevara.
Magandang hapon, Sec Martin, at magandang hapon sa lahat ng sumusubaybay dito sa ating programa. Alam mo, Sec, it is of utmost necessity that law and order be maintained and preserved during critical times, such as during a public health emergency or a state of national calamity. The rule of law is not suspended during a pandemic. So in this regard, the DOJ continues to perform its role of administering criminal justice in an even more stringent and innovative manner. So, for example, in the matter of the prosecution service, operations continue even during the lockdown. And in this regard, our prosecution service has instituted online inquest services, or e-inquest, where inquest in those areas where connectivity is good are conducted by means of online facilities. That's why we call it electronic inquest. And also we allow the electronic filing of complaints for preliminary investigation. And again, in those areas where connectivity is good, we conduct preliminary investigation also online. And our prosecutors continue to appear and perform their roles during trial in court proceedings, either by video conferencing or by actually appearing in court if the court requires so. Secondly, the DOJ, through its investigative arm, the National Bureau of Investigation, has focused or targeted its efforts in the investigation of offenses which are connected with the pandemic. most notably cases pertaining or complaints pertaining to hoarding, overpricing, profiteering, violation of the cash aid, yung tinatawag nating ayuda, violation of quarantine protocols, and so forth and so on. Thirdly, the DOJ is a major participant. In fact, it's an original member of the IATF. And during the regular meetings of the IATF, the DOJ makes or ensures that whenever stringent measures are being considered by the IATF in order to prevent the transmission of the virus, that the constitutional rights of the people are also protected. So we we factor in during our discussions measures on how to ensure that certain rights of the people, no? For example, the right to travel, right to privacy, right to free exercise of religion, right to peaceable assembly, and so forth and so on, are also respected. So those are the ways and means that the DOJ has been performing its role in the administration of justice during the pandemic times. Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you so much, Secretary Guevara. Ang ating susunod po na katanungan ay para po naman sa cluster ng Climate Change Adaptation Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction Cluster. Unahin po natin si Secretary Roy Cimatu. How will the enhanced national greening program help communities whose livelihoods are affected by the pandemic? How will your department help communities whose livelihoods are affected by the pandemic? Secretary Roy Cimatu, good afternoon po muli.
Good afternoon, Secretary Andanar. Noong nag-umpisa tayo na mag-ECQ, ay naramdaman ko na hirap talaga yung mga nasa bundok. Wala na silang trabaho eh. So ang ginawa ko ay sinabihan ko yung aking director na pwede bang yung mga seedlings na itatanim, kasi wala pa naman tatanim ngayon, iba mag-ulan eh. So habang wala pa yan, ay bigyan sila ng konting pangano sa mga pamilya. So instructions na i-advance mo na yung para sa mga seedlings nila. Anyway, nandiyan na yung seedlings eh. So, nagbigay sila ng mga 700 milyon na kaagad para sa mga pantawid lang muna, para sa mga pamilya. About 7,000 families ang nabigyan ng advance. So, meron sila ngayon binamit para sa during the pandemic. Kasi kung normally naman nabibigyan sila ng pondo ng National Greening Program sa sa third quarter, fourth quarter na sa tagulan. So habang wala pa yon ay binigyan namin. So yan ang pantawid nila. Nagamit natin yung National Greening Program para dito sa mga initial naman na kailangan ng mga tao doon, especially sa families. So ito ang medyo humble contribution ng aming department para naman lalo na yung mga hindi pa nakatanggap at that time ng yung social amelioration, ito na bigay sa kanila. So na-anticipate ko na ito, Mr. Secretary. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat po, Secretary Roy. Ang susunod po na katanungan ay para po kay Secretary Delphine Lorenzana. What are the preparedness actions or measures of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council Office of the Civil Defense for the rainy season? Magandang hapon po muli, Secretary Del.
Magandang hapon, Secretary Martin. We do not need additional preparation for this because for the past several years, we have been developing the infrastructures and capacities of our regional and provincial disaster management councils. So nandiyan na sila dahil nga tayo ay dinadalaw ng ulan at bagyo taon-taon. ay nakagawa na tayo ng mga hakbang. We have already strengthened the capacities of the provinces, the towns, and the barangays, in fact, to address any adverse effect of the rainy season. So, yan ang sagot ko, Secretary Martin. Handa tayo. Handa yung NDRRMC at saka yung OCD para sa pagdating ng tagulan. Thank you.
Thank you po, Secretary Del Lorenzana. Ang susunod na katanungan ay para po kay Secretary Boy de la Peña ng DOST. The country, being prone to various natural hazards, needs to be on guard from these threats while also combating COVID-19. There are two agencies under the DOST, Pag-asa and FIVOLCS, which are our frontliners in monitoring and providing information and warning of hydro, meteorological, and geological events in areas that can be affected. Are there new science, technology, and innovation solutions from these agencies to improve early warning and hazard and risk assessments? Magandang hapon po, Secretary Boy de la Peña.
Magandang hapon, Sec Martin. And I have to speak for two agencies under the Department of Science and Technology. First, on Pag-asa, what we have done was to improve our capabilities through the installation of more facilities. For example, we have installed additional Doppler radars for tropical cyclone and rain monitoring, and high-frequency Doppler radars for sea waves monitoring, as well as flood forecasting and warning systems. So this meant an increase of in the case of our Doppler radars, an increase from 16 to 17. In the case of our high-frequency Doppler radars, from 12 to 24. In the case of our flood forecasting and warning systems, from 8 to 13. And this will still be augmented by the ongoing establishment of 5 more flood forecasting and warning systems in the river basins in Abulog, Ilog, Hilabangan, Agusan, Mindanao, and Aklan. We also have a new method to predict the likelihood of tropical cyclone occurrence within the next 2 weeks. And this has been developed by a team of our researchers at Pag-asa. This method provides information on the possible occurrence of tropical cyclone and its path and trajectory 5 to 16 days in advance. It is now being used and tested by Pag-asa's weather forecasters, and the initial observations reveal that the new method performs with considerable accuracy. Now, in the case of our PBOX, to improve our capability to monitor earthquakes, we continuously expanded the Philippine Seismic Network through the commissioning of additional satellite telemetered seismic stations. So from 98 seismic stations in 2017, we have now 104 seismic stations nationwide. And this will help us monitor small earthquakes with magnitudes less than 3, which is essential in predicting possible sites of bigger and more damaging earthquakes. To address also the lack of systematized information for an effective climate and disaster risk assessment, the DOST has supported PBOX. Actually, they led a multi-agency geospatial information management and analysis project for hazards and risk assessment in the Philippines, which we call in short GeoRisk PH. This GeoRisk PH is a risk assessment tool that systematizes hazards and exposure data from various sources into one platform and provides essential tools for disaster risk management. The most publicly accessed tool of the GeoRisk PH platform is the web-based Hazard Hunter PH. This is an app which generates in a few clicks accurate hazard assessment report for seismic, volcanic, and hydrometeorological hazards. Hazard Hunter PH has provided property owners, buyers, land developers, and planners real-time and free-of-charge hazard assessment reports. Another platform is the GeoAnalytics PH, which can generate maps and analytics to maximize smart and efficient decision-making and policy-making. This application could be used in the smart implementation of infrastructure projects under the Build program, and of course, development efforts towards achieving the long-term goals aligned with our Ambition 2040. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Secretary Boy de la Peña. Ang susunod po na katanungan ay para kay Secretary Willie Dar ng Department of Agriculture. Sa panahon ng pandemya, paano natutulungan ng Department of Agriculture ang mga maliliit na magsasaka sa kanayunan na halos hindi makapagdala ng kanilang produkto sa mga pamilihang bayan upang ipagbili at makapamili din ng kanilang sariling pangangailangan, lalo na sa araw-araw na pagkain. Sec. Willie Dar, magandang hapon po sa inyo.
Magandang hapon po naman, Sec. Martin at saka mga colleagues sa cabinet and sa lahat po na good afternoon to all of the colleagues from cabinet. Una, let me mention na we got the strong support of the IATF in terms of all the unhampered movement of cargoes, particularly food supplies and medicines, including logistical support. So, ang laking tulong po itong whole of nation approach under the IATF, under the leadership of President Rodrigo Roa Duterte. At gusto kong banggitin na marami tayong ginawa at ginagawa pa during this pandemic. Let me mention a number of them. One is enhanced implementation of Kadiwa ni Ani at Kita, purposely strengthening our partnership with the private sector engaged in agribusiness para mabili lahat o ma-track yung mga produkto na galing doon sa kanayunan, mas lalo na doon sa mga trading post, kagaya po ng La Trinidad Benguet at sa Bamban, Nueva Vizcaya, at dito sa South naman, dito sa Sariaya, Quezon at saka sa Batangas. So gusto natin na itong mga food supplies ay makarating po sa metro areas, kagaya po dito sa Metro Manila na maraming populasyon. Now, ano po ang resulta nitong Kadiwa ni Ani at Kita? Mayroon total sales na 5.5 billion as a result of partnering with agribusiness sector and even the farmers themselves help themselves track their produce towards the market areas, Kadiwa outlets dito sa Metro Manila. Mayroon rin tayong ugnayan sa mga local government units at may advokasya tayo during this last 4 months na yung mga local government chief executives ay bibili na ng mga food packs for their distribution at may na-monitor po kami na worth 2.5 billion na ang binili ng local government units sa mga kanilang mga farmers at fishers. So ang laki po ng influensya nitong Kadiwa at Ani at Kita. Now, pangalawa po ay mayroon amelioration for farmers. Yung, let me mention a number of these amelioration programs. One is mayroon tayong expanded Sure Aid and Recovery Project for marginal small farmers and fishers. They can borrow as high as 25,000 pesos, zero interest, and payable in 10 years, walang collateral. Ilan na po ang nag-avail nito? We have total 30,699 farmers getting 767 million pesos. And we have released to our partner lending conduits 1.12 billion pesos. Now, another Sure Aid loan program ay para sa micro and small enterprises naman. 93 enterprises have now availed, totaling 646 million pesos. And we have released to our partner lending conduits 1.5 billion pesos. Now, another one directed to the rice farmers, mayroon tayong ibinigay na financial subsidy for rice farmers. Those affected particularly by the rice tariffication law. About 3 billion has been given to 591,246 beneficiaries. Early this year, let me also mention rice farmer financial assistance, another 3 billion, and 597,404 beneficiaries were benefited from this amelioration for them. So again, gusto natin banggitin Sec Martin ang kagawaran ng pagsasaka with all our partners, a whole of nation approach ay sinisiguro po natin na mayroon tayong sapat na pagkain dito during the pandemya, at we would like to believe that we can survive and we can reboot again Philippine agriculture with the help of President Rodrigo Roa Duterte. I would like to then conclude by saying that no amount of pandemic and or impacts of climate change can slow us down. No lockdown can really delay our activities in farming and fishing. Let us be resilient and turn challenges into opportunities to survive and move forward towards a food secure and more resilient Philippines with prosperous farmers and fishers. Mabuhay po tayong lahat. Babangon ang Pilipinas.
Maraming salamat po, Secretary Willie Dar ng Department of Agriculture. Ang susunod po na katanungan ay para po sa Climate Change Commission. Secretary Emmanuel de Guzman, what is the role of climate change adaptation and mitigation in the green recovery? Is it imperative to anchor green recovery under climate change action? Magandang hapon po, Secretary de Guzman.
Thank you, Secretary Martin. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Tulad po ng COVID, climate change is an urgent global concern. It is an existential threat. It is a life and death issue. Like our response to COVID, we must heed science in responding to the climate crisis. Kailangan po nating ibangon muli ang ating ekonomiya mula sa dagok ng pandemya ng mas matatag kaysa dati. We cannot just go back to business as usual, vulnerable and defenseless against the next pandemic or global disruption. Mahalaga pong kaakibat ng pagbabago at pagbabangon ng ating bayan mula sa pandemya ang mabisang pagtugon at pag-angkop sa climate change. This is how we've been approaching green recovery in the Cabinet Cluster on Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction. Our Green Recovery Program shall uphold the health of the people and the planet. It shall let us survive and thrive amid climate change. Sa layuning ito, binabalangkas po ng climate change ang Nationally Determined Contributions or NDC. Ito po ang susi sa ating green recovery. The NDC, which embodies our climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies, will give us clean air and a healthy environment. It will deliver green investments and green jobs to our countrysides. It will let our sectors and industries transform into a green economy. In short, it will pave our country's sustainable future. This transformation is achievable po if we act now and act together, because the timing and scale of our response will spell the difference between suffering and surviving from the impact of climate disruptions. Sa pamamagitan po ng ating pagkakasa at pagtutulungan sa pagtugon sa COVID at climate change, makakaasa po ang ating bansa sa isang mas ligtas at masaganang bukas. Maraming pong salamat, Sec. Martin.
Maraming salamat po sa inyong panahon, Secretary Manuel de Guzman ng Climate Change Commission. Ang huling katanungan po natin ay para kay Cabinet Secretary Carlo Nograles. Do you think that the goal of the Pre-SONA fora has been achieved despite the pandemic that the country is in right now? Cabinet Secretary Carlo Nograles, magandang hapon muli sa iyo.
Magandang hapon po muli, Secretary Martin Andanar. Opo, alam naman po natin na ang hangarin po ng ating mga Pre-SONA ay para tulungan ang ating Pangulo na maikwento, maibalita, maipahayag ang lahat ng mga nagawa na, ang mga ginagawa at kung ano pa ang gagawin ng kanyang administrasyon at ng inyong pamahalaan. Dahil hindi naman po maipasok sa loob lamang ng isang speech ang lahat ng mga ito. Kaya nga po, sa pamamagitan ng ating Pre-SONA ay naisapubliko na po natin ang lahat ng mga data, mga facts and figures, ang lahat ng mga numero patungkol sa ating mga accomplishments at sa ating mga targets. Pangalawa po ay naipahayag po natin ang lahat ng mga programa, proyekto at mga activities na gagawin at ginagawa ng inyong pamahalaan. At napaka-importante po nito sa panahon ng COVID-19 dahil gusto po natin i-assure ang ating mga kababayan na patuloy po ang lahat ng mga programa at proyekto ng gobyerno, in fact, nadagdagan pa bilang panlaban natin sa pandemya ng COVID-19. At sa pamamagitan ng ating mga open forum at sa ating Pre-SONA ay nagkaroon tayo ng isang feedback mechanism upang ating marinig mula sa ating mga kababayan kung ano pa ang kanilang mga katanungan, ano ang kanilang mga issues at concerns. Sa ganitong paraan po ay hindi lamang whole of government approach, kundi whole of nation approach po ang ginagawa natin para labanan ang COVID-19 at kung ano pa man ang iba pang mga pagsubok na ating mga nararanasan bilang isang bansa. Ang importante po para sa lahat ay anuman ang klaseng pagsubok ay kailangan tayong lahat ay magkaisa, magbayanihan at magtulungan. At siyempre, dapat hindi po tayo mawawalan ng pag-asa. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po, Cabinet Secretary Nograles. Maraming salamat sa ating mga Cabinet Secretaries. Sana ay nabigyan linaw ang ilan sa mga katanungan ng publiko. Pilipinas, tayo po'y humaharap sa mga matinding suliranin sa pagbubukas pa lamang ng taon. Pinakamabigat na rito ang COVID-19 pandemic na naging matindi ang epekto sa ekonomiya ng bansa at sa pang-araw-araw na buhay ng bawat Pilipino. Dito, higit na nasubok at napatunayan ang tunay na